Harold and the Purple Crayon, directed by Carlos Saldanha, stars Zachary Levi and Zooey Deschanel. Inside of his book, adventurous Harold can make anything come to life simply by drawing it. After he grows up and draws himself off the book pages and into the real world, Harold finds he has a lot to learn about his real life, and that his trusty Purple Crayon may set off more hilarious hijinks than he thought possible. When the power of unlimited imagination falls into the wrong hands, it will take all of Harold and friends' creativity to save both the real world and his own. I know this part of my videos are usually set in stone, but I need to break character for a second. Why is the description of this movie so long? Good lord. I usually give reasons as to why I go see a lot of movies I review on this channel. I guess if you want a deeper reason as for why I went to see this movie, it's an excuse for me to get inches closer to finishing certain people's filmographies. But the main reason I went to go see this is because a friend invited me to a screening of this movie in our local cinema, and that's really the only reason. Like, I would see the trailers for this movie and not be impressed with what I saw, but I still decided to check it out anyways. Firstly, I'll start with the performances. I think Zachary Levi is pretty bad here. I swear him taking the role of this movie is a direct result of the ongoing mental breakdown this guy went on after Shazam! Fury of the Gods flopped at the box office. If you remember, one day he went on a live stream complaining about the film's failure. I genuinely think only an insane man would take a role like this. Maybe he's just being typecast as a child in a man's body, since that was the shtick of Shazam, and it's basically how we act here. We see at the start Harold as a child, and then we see him grow up. However, he still acts like a child the whole time, which doesn't really make sense, but he basically just acts like an idiot the entire movie. On top of this, his character is just badly written. He's honestly an asshole, as there's some moments where he tries to get his friends out of a predicament, and rather than choosing the safer option, he will draw something that's just more dangerous, all for the sake of quote-unquote fun. For the majority of the movie, he is just annoying and incredibly unfunny, which is both down to his delivery of jokes and the writing itself. He's the lead of the movie, and I was always just irritated whenever he was on screen. Zooey Deschanel isn't that good here either. The entire time she's there, she's completely phoning in her performance, and I honestly don't blame her for this. As you could tell, whenever she's on screen, she knows she's in a piece of shit. She knows she's in a D-list version of the movie Elf, which she also starred in. A lot of the time, whenever she delivers her lines, they're always so very bland and monotone. She just sounds so fucking bored the whole time she's on screen. They write her character to be pretty stupid, as there's all these weird things happening around her, which only starts to happen when Harold shows up in her life, and somehow she never puts together that he is the one doing all of these weird things, and it just doesn't feel realistic even in the context of this fantasy world. It just made no sense to me. I do feel bad seeing her in a movie because she can deliver a good performance, but I do realize she took the job for this movie for a good paycheck. At least I hope it was good. I hope it was worth it for taking a role like this. Benjamin Botani plays the kid of Zooey Deschanel's character, and I'll keep my thoughts about this kid brief, and I don't want to be too harsh obviously since he's just a kid, but unfortunately due to poor directing and a bad script, he falls into the trap of being a pretty bad child actor. He delivers every line as if it was the first take, and every single time he does it, it just feels so obvious. A lot of times he would have these crazy expressions. His eyes were always bulging out of his head for a majority of the movie, and I don't know if this was a choice from the kid or the director himself, but it always felt very distracting at times. There isn't really too much else to his performance, but I do hope this kid keeps trying to act. Hopefully the direction of his career picks up and he gets better movies to be in. Jemaine Clement plays the villain in this movie, and I will say, for all the faults this movie has, I actually liked him here. I'm a fan of his style of comedy after seeing the series Flight of the Conchords, as this was another reason that made me intrigued about seeing this movie. But as soon as he appears in the movie, it makes things more bearable to sit through, only whenever he's on screen though. When he does appear, he always manages to chew up the scenery, and while the script is pretty weak, whenever he delivers a line, he always manages to make it work, and some of his humor coming true managed to get a few chuckles out of me. I think his performance is the only thing that I may have genuinely liked about this movie. It felt like he was on another wavelength. It felt like he was the only one that was truly trying. There's times it even feels like he's having fun being a villain in this. He's an incredibly threatening villain. He plays more into the comedic villain role, which he does decently. And for a movie like this, of course you're not going to have a threatening villain at all, but I still thought he did what he could with the material he was given. I'll talk about probably the only other positive I have about this movie. As soon as this movie starts, we are treated to what feels like a blend of 2D, 3D animation, which plays more into the 2D aspect of it. And it was actually decent to look at. It was animated well and had a style that actually gets somewhat new and refreshing in an age where traditional 2D animation is thrown out the window in the mainstream at least. This takes up what feels like the first 5 minutes of the movie, because unfortunately this movie doesn't want any of the kids to get get bored watching this as we quickly go into the real world, which immediately just looks like shit. The entire movie that isn't animated looks horrible. It's really badly and flatly lit. The entire movie looks like an hour and a half SNL skit, and not in a good way. The movie itself feels like a concept that would be thought up by SNL writers as a joke to the types of family films based on an IP that people know that might not be too popular, where they would take the concept of the character from said IP and put it into the real world. When the characters come into the real world, two of Harold's friends, which are animals in their world, turn into humans when they come into the real world, and for the entire runtime I was waiting for them to explain why this happens, but we never get one. My bet is that it's a budgeting issue. They probably didn't want to go through the effort of having these CGI animals throughout the whole movie. And on one hand, admittedly, I am kind of glad they did this, as it probably would have made the movie so much worse. However, in doing this, they've already made the logic of this movie very confusing so early on. Speaking of logic, they really don't care for it in this movie, as there's a scene where Harold and his friend meet Zooey Deschanel's character and they're in her car. Harold fiddles with the seatbelt as if he doesn't know what that is. And as the movie goes on, we see him draw things like an ice cream, and I think there's a line about him talking about drawing a washing machine or some shit like that. But what I'm getting at is the fact that the writers throw in this sense of Harold being stupid by not knowing what a seatbelt is. We are led to believe that the entire time of him living in his own world that he has never drawn a fucking car before. It just felt so moronic and shows the writers' lack of caring or interest in trying to give this movie some sort of cohesion. I felt like some of the plot points in this just felt so empty. One of Harold's friends gets separated from him and we follow her for a bit, but these scenes ultimately just feel really pointless, and I don't think we have to cut back to her so often. They're put here for the sake of comedy, but nothing she does or the scenario she gets herself into ends up being really funny and just is boring. Another plot point that goes nowhere is we follow these two cops that start tracking down Harold and his friends, and I thought they were leading these two characters to join the main story, but nope. After they put the group in prison, we genuinely never see these characters ever again. It just feels like it could have been taken out entirely and you would have missed absolutely nothing. This is a very small thing too, but the final confrontation of this movie shows Harold and Jermaine's character draw things to fight each other, and while I understand Jermaine's character has his fascination with the fantasy genre, I never understood why the fucker didn't just pull out a gun and shoot Harold in the fucking head. A lot of the effects in this movie look pretty bad. As we get to the final confrontation of this movie, in fact, the effects look so bad, I genuinely think if Robert Rodriguez directed this, it would have looked so much better. There's a scene where characters are in a plane and the wide shots of the plane look terrible. When they're inside the plane, it looks like such an obvious green screen too. I will say it's probably not the most god-awful effects I've ever seen. I've definitely seen worse in my time, but a lot of the CGI in this movie is still pretty bad. The script of this movie is very undesirable. It's so basic and by the numbers. Like I said, it feels like those shitty kids movies in the early 2010s where they take an IP, usually animated, and bring the character into the real world. The biggest thing I hate about this script is halfway through the movie we realize that the book in the movie is based on makes no sense, which takes the meta angle of these characters realizing they're characters. And honestly, I'm getting so fucking sick of meta and post-ironic humor being used as plot points in so many movies nowadays. Why couldn't these two worlds just be worlds that exist with each other? Why do they have to come from a book that is known in the movie and also in our physical reality? It just feels like a lazy way for the writers to wink at the audience. If anything, it takes you out of the movie because you're being reminded you're watching nothing more than a cash grab. But is this movie even a cash grab? How many fucking people are actually going to remember Harold and the Purple Crayon from when they were kids? Is this something parents still read to their kids nowadays? The fact that I have to ask so many questions just shows how much of a failure this movie is. Overall, obviously, I didn't like this movie. It feels like such a nothing movie. It genuinely doesn't feel real. I'll remember this in a year and try to recollect whether it was a fucking fever dream or not. I feel like this was made to cover up some sort of money laundering scheme, and it also solidifies to me how awful of a company Sony is. Which reminds me, obviously, as since it's a Sony movie, there is an abundance of product placement. The most egregious part that happens is during a fight scene at the end, we cut to a guy who sells things, and below him is just a bunch of fucking products. It was so laughable. I'm surprised this movie managed to get greenlit, because I don't even know if I could see a kids enjoying a movie like this. It's brain rot that you put in front of your kids for an hour and a half. You don't have to put in the effort to actually look after your own child. I'm giving Howard and the Purple Crayon half a star star. There's nothing redeemable about this movie to me, and I hope I never get to check it out again. The only thing that gave me slight enjoyment was the nice enough looking animation and the joyous performance from Jemaine Clement, who really does carry this pile of shit. It's just completely uninspired, horribly written, and overall very boring that I can't see any families actually enjoying this. I guess at the same time, it is inoffensive, it's harmless. If you put this on for your kids, it's not going to completely kill their brain cells, but I still wouldn't recommend this to anyone ever.